Community. No, not the TV show, though that is an underrated classic. Without community, the hobby of sports cards is empty. Sports cards hold no inherent value. We give them value because of our connection to them. But without a strong community, eventually that connection and that value disappear. I remember growing up, I had 3 friends in my neighborhood that I often traded cards with, and each of them approached the hobby in a very different way from each other. I think these 3 examples highlight something very important. With one friend, all he wanted was the good rookie cards of the greats. In fact, he ended up having almost no cards, just a couple of key ones and special frames hanging on his bedroom wall. A Griffey Jr. rookie, a Jose Canseco rookie, and maybe 10 other cards. To him, everything else was garbage. He was no fun to trade with or discuss cards with at all. He honestly just didn't even really care about the hobby. He just wanted a couple of cool things to show off, and he thought he would make a bunch of money from them at some point as well. That's about it. It was a status symbol and a long-term hold, but he wasn't really participating in the hobby in any ongoing regular way. Now, of course, to each his own, but for the hobby to be a vibrant thing, there needs to be more than this. There can always be people on the edges of the community, that's fine, but this by itself can never be the catalyst for a long-term healthy hobby. A second friend had a different approach. He was much more of a collector and was much more active with the hobby on a regular basis. But he still had one thing central and above all else when it came to trading cards. He wanted to quote-unquote win. Well, he wasn't only going for this or that 1 or 2 special cards like my friend from the first example. He was only in it to win it. He was all and only about the value of his collection inching forward. That was all. When we would hang out and trade cards, he would only trade if he had the advantage, every single time. If I offered him an even value trade, he wouldn't do it unless I threw in something to give him the one-up, every single time. If he had a card he knew I particularly wanted, like a cool Nick Van Exel card since he was my main PC guy, then he would try to squeeze out even more from me. It didn't take long for this to become extremely annoying. Hanging out and trading cards with him was no fun. The nature of his relationship with the hobby was purely transactional. It wasn't rooted in anything else. Even the conversations we had about cards were focused on value-related things only. I can't even think of a single time we discussed the sport or the players or anything while hanging out and trading cards. Due to all of this, eventually the hobby just kind of faded away from our friendship, and I was happy when it did. My friendship with him was actually better when sports cards were not part of it, and eventually he just faded away from the hobby once he wasn't making profit from it. If the sports card collector community was made up of only transactional relationships like this, the hobby would not last through the generations. Too often, people's engagement with the sports card hobby is a reflection of something close to these first 2 examples. And if those 2 examples had been my only connection into the community of the hobby, I'm sure I would have never had much interest to stay connected. But for me, luckily, there was a third friend in my neighborhood who also collected sports cards, and his connection into the hobby was much different than the previous ones. With this third friend, when we'd hang out, we'd look through our cards, discuss the players, discuss our thoughts about the teams and the up-and-coming rookies. We'd talk about which insert sets we thought looked cool, or which packs we were most enjoying opening. The cards were like the catalyst for interesting and fun hangout time. And then when we'd trade cards, it was always fair and enjoyable. If I had a card I know he'd like, and he had a PC of Muggsy Bogues, then I'd give him a really good deal, or even just give him the card for free. And if he had a really cool Nick Van Exel card, he'd do the same. When we opened packs or went looking at the local sports card shops, we kept an eye out for stuff the other person would like to talk about it later, even if we didn't end up buying it. When we traded cards, sometimes I'd come out with the advantage, sometimes he would, but no one ever kept track, and I imagine it all evened itself out in the end. And even if it didn't, it doesn't matter. The process itself was the joy. The end result was secondary. The way the hobby was an integrated part of our friendship made me feel more connected to the hobby, and the hobby helped strengthen the friendship as well. This particular friend is still one of my lifelong friends, and I've been close to him throughout my whole life, whereas the other 2 friends I lost track of after high school. Now, this is just a couple of examples, but this is a good metaphor for why I think the community aspect of the hobby is so essential. Connections with other sports card collectors that are rooted in this kind of trust and friendship make the hobby enjoyable, and that enjoyment helps people stay connected with the hobby. This was the kind of interaction with sports cards that makes me want to be part of the sports card hobby even today as a middle-aged dude with a gray beard. If my only connection with others in the sports card hobby was transactional in nature alone, I have no doubt I wouldn't be involved today, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. And like I said in the intro to this video, the only way that sports cards have value is if we collectively decide to give them value. But if we don't have a vibrant community in the hobby, eventually that value just disappears.